Today we are going to discuss some key agent productivity metrics that will help you understand who the top performers are in your call center and give you a better understanding of a customer's experience and satisfaction when they connect to your team. Specifically, we're going to look at two metrics: average handle time and percentage of calls transferred. Let's start with some definitions. Average handle time is the average total engagement time an agent spends with each customer. This can be called different things in different systems, but essentially you're looking for a roll-up of talk time, hold time, and wrap time associated with an agent's call. If you do not utilize all of these in your call center, you can't get a roll-up metric with all of them, then at minimum you should consider average talk time here. Our other metric is percentage of calls transferred, and this measures the number of calls an agent is transferring somewhere else. We've all been the frustrated customer that's been bounced from person to manager to supervisor before. This is the metric that shows how frequently an agent is doing that to your customers. Now, what I'm going to do today is teach you how to use these metrics in your own environment to determine the best benchmarks. I don't have clear-cut recommendations for what these values should be, and there's good reason for this. Take, for example, percentage of calls transferred. If you run an operator group, then your operator's job is to take calls, figure out what a customer is looking for, and field those calls to the appropriate department. Those operators will likely have a 70, 80, or even 90% transfer rate, and that's perfectly fine. That's their job. But if you run a customer service group and you find a transfer rate of 70, 80, or 90%, that's extremely concerning. So instead, what I want you to do is take your agents and group them together to find agents that have a like skill set, job function, and training. For example, put all of your Tier 1 agents together in a peer group and all of your Tier 2 agents together in another group. Then in those groups, use these metrics comparatively to find outliers. Let me show you how we do this in Brightmetrics. We have a customer here, and we can easily see for their call center how many calls each of their agents has taken over the last 30 days. For simplicity, let's assume that all of these agents have the same skill set and job function. They're in a peer group together. If we drill through this chart and put in our average handle time and percentage of calls transferred, then we find group average metrics in our totals. The average transfer rate is 18.57%, and the average handle time, it's called treatment time in this system, is 6 minutes and 10 seconds. Now, let's sort by the percentage of calls transferred. Here we find that Agent A is transferring about 9% higher than our group average, and Agent B is transferring about 5% lower than our group average. These are our outliers. We can do the same thing on treatment average time. We find that Agent C is spending just about 2 minutes more time engaged, and Agent D is spending about 1.5 minutes less time engaged on average. So what do we do with this information? Well, you should map your outliers to a quadrant like this, with low and high sections for each metric relative to your group averages. Let's step through these one by one. In the upper left-hand corner, we have agents with a high handled average time and a high percentage of calls transferred. These are almost always new agents. They're spending a lot of time on the phone, but ultimately don't have the knowledge or skill set yet to solve certain issues, so they're escalating and transferring. This is fine as long as you're getting that agent proper training. If you find this correlation with a more established agent, then we would have cause for concern. It's likely an indication that they didn't receive enough training or that maybe they're a bad fit for this role. If we move down the quadrant from there to the lower left, we find agents with a low average handle time and a high percentage of calls transferred. These agents aren't spending a lot of time on the phone, but they are escalating a lot of calls. Candidly, I call these agents cherry pickers. There are two main causes for agent performance like this. Either they're untrained on the harder issues coming to them, and thus they're escalating more than their peers. In this case, you should get them some additional training. Or they're being lazy and they're passing off work to someone else. Either way, this is a massive red flag and something you should look to remediate quickly. On the right-hand side of our quadrant, we solve the problem of escalations, which is good. In general, The spot that you want to find an agent in is the upper right-hand corner. They're spending a little bit more time on the phone than average, and they go the extra mile for the customer, and ultimately the customer's request is resolved on the first touch most of the time. As long as that handled average time doesn't get too high, this is the good spot. If it gets too high, we don't want them wasting time, so you'd want to see that kind of drift back towards the midline. But in general, this is a good spot to be in. The lower right quadrant is an interesting one. On paper, this looks great. This agent isn't escalating or transferring a lot, and they're also not spending a ton of time on the phone, so they can take more calls on a daily basis. But be careful with this quadrant and dig a little deeper. I'd recommend checking out customer satisfaction metrics or sales numbers for the agent depending on the type of group. Sometimes not spending enough time on the phone can frustrate a customer because they feel like they weren't understood or that the agent didn't display enough empathy. In sales groups, low handle time is typically indicative of an agent's inability to use objection handles properly. So check out those ancillary stats, and if everything looks good, then hang on to that agent. They're kind of the dream. But if you see some issues, work with them, train them accordingly. So those are some quick tips for an efficient way to understand how productive your agents are and whether or not your customers are being well served by your team. For more information about metrics like these, visit brightmetrics.com.